Hello, everyone. My name is Meda. I'm pretty sure I was introduced. And I would like to talk about something that is deeply personal for me. So what's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name, would still smell as sweet. Those are the words spoken by Juliet, as some of you may recognize, in William Shakespeare's famous play, Romeo and Juliet. Juliet asks a very important question. What is the value of a name? What can we understand from it about the subject we learn? She wanted to be with her lover Romeo, but because of his last name, Montecchi, they could just not be. They could have not fall in love because that would have been wrong. But of course, someone's name does not change who they are as a person. A different example would be, let's say, something different, a walkie-talkie, right? My first impression that's kind of a silly name, is it? But in reality, it is a highly effective communication device used in military operations of all things. So this contradiction can be fun, but not in all cases, especially when talking about serious mental disorders like ADHD, the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is my main speech. So the same way that all things have been around for a long time, ADHD has only been discovered quite recently by modern science. In the early 30s, two German doctors, Franz Kalme and Hans Polnow, documented ADHD as a trend amongst young hyperactive children, mostly boys. They dubbed this phenomenon the hyperkinetic disease, which, as you can imagine, is not the best name for something like ADHD. They observed various symptoms, such as hyperactive ones. Quote, "These children cannot stay still for a second, run up and down the room, climb about, preferring high furniture in particular." Kind of funny, but they call this excess energy aimless and pointless. What's the meaning of it? They don't really understand it. Furthermore, they talked about other symptom inattention, talking how these children struggled with paying attention to certain things. But if they can't pay attention, they also noticed there was another thing where children would actually pay a lot of attention to certain things that they found really interesting, describing another symptom, or rather trait of ADHD, which is hyperfocus, which is ability to intensely concentrate on various things of interest. So now we're talking about ADHD. So the name itself, ADHD, only got introduced in the late 80s with the renewed edition of the Third Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or in short, DSM-3, released by the American Psychic Association. I want to say something about the DSM, is that it's strictly a list of behavioral and cognitional symptoms rather than a definition of what ADHD is, more so what it looks like. And it's meant for clinicians as a way to diagnose ADHD more, it just makes the process of diagnosing simpler because they have a list of, oh, that. It's bullet points. So what I'm trying to say in my speech, I would like to propose a new name for ADHD that would clearly sum up what ADHD actually is at its core. And why is that important? Why am I talking about this? So I've seen firsthand how misleading the name attention deficit hyperactivity disorder can be, sometimes ending in jokes, for example, restless hand-movement disorder. What is that? What they actually described was stimming, but it's still not really a nice comment to say. Or there was this tweet going around online how I think someone said oh, no one tells how stressful is ADHD for those who have, how Halloween shopping is stressful for those who have ADHD, because it's so much to do. And someone went oh my God, you people can't do anything. And like all these jokes and comments happen because people fundamentally don't really understand what it is. ADHD, like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, to someone who doesn't know what it is or what it feels like to have it, sounds something like can't pay attention, can't sit still, some brain jumble disorder, sickness, something. What? Like, if that's your first impression, of course you're not gonna take it seriously, right? Right. And the status quo, because of that, is that ADHD has all these different attached notions that it's only a childhood disorder or that only boys have it, which is because a lot of research, early research, was done on young little boys, and it's almost like an immaturity thing or like back parenting, lack of discipline, or just straight up laziness, which obviously all these ideas are not true. I would not be talking about this if they were. But then, if this and that, why am I talking about this? What is actually ADHD then? And I'm here to tell you that the National Institute of Mental Health characterizes ADHD as a developmental disorder with an ongoing pattern of more or one presentations of symptoms, which are inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. But everyone gets a bit, let's say, impulsive and like buys themselves a treat that they shouldn't, you might say, and yes, of course they do. But the main difference between those who have ADHD and those who don't, so like neurotypical people, which is people who are just like normal, quote unquote, is the frequency of these symptoms. Someone who's neurotypical might like forget their keys like every once in a month. I forget my keys pretty much daily. I have no idea where they are right now. Oh, they're there. Like it's the frequency thing. For a diagnosis, these symptoms have to be frequent and constant in multiple of situations. So like school, on stage, with friends, with family, everywhere. But I want to talk about symptoms more is that, again, a lot of research was based on young kids, especially boys, who societally are less pressured to mask. Mask is to hide your symptoms. And like a lot of like ADHD that's why ADHD has like this rep of being like hyperactive and won't be able to like sit still and like blabbering and all that. Is because a lot of girls, like for example me, I've fallen for this too, where because my struggles weren't as visible, because I was masking, no one really helped me because they just didn't think it was that bad for me to like get a diagnosis officially, even if they were aware of it, that I might have this. So because I was all alone, no one really helped me. Unfortunately, I started researching ADHD on my own, and I tried to understand like what it is besides the symptoms and like what's actually going on in my own mind and those who are like me. And what I discovered that a lot of these articles actually had this very pitying tone to them, like it felt like a sour feeling in your mouth. And like, for example, they talked about like the symptoms and how it's not your kid's fault that they have it. Sorry, I'm the kid. What is going on? They talked about how those with ADHD tend to have low self-esteem, which is like, yeah, that makes sense if everyone's constantly telling how wrong I am for, I don't know, presenting symptoms of things I can't control. Or how like it's genetic and incurable, which a lot of people tend to concentrate on that when like, of course it's incurable, it's not something anyone can fix. And that is because I came across this video of this creator who talked like ADHD is a terrible name because it doesn't describe what it is. Because, like listen to this, attention deficit. Like that's not true, that implies there's no attention that we can use like to pay, right? But ADHDers have plenty of attention. Like the entire concept of hyperfocus just disproves that entirely. And like I couldn't read in this speech if I didn't have focus, of course. So And then like hyperactivity. Hyperactivity is actually just one of the main 3 symptoms I mentioned before of diagnosing ADHD. So that's not really accurate either. It's just like the first thing that people notice about ADHD, and not everyone, but like they do. And finally, disorder. Like what does that even mean, right? Well, disorder is like something different, something non-normal. But ADHD is not normal. It's been around for ages, right? So what is ADHD? Well, ADHD affects your brain on a chemical level. The dopamine receptor genes don't really work as they should. There's 5 of them, from D1 to D5, but we think that D2 and D4 are the ones most likely at fault. So these genes transfer dopamine, but what happens, they lose some of that dopamine while transferring them. And it kind of ends up having a dopamine deficiency. Everyone has the same amount of dopamine, but they kind of just it just gets lost in the process. And what is dopamine? Why am I talking about it? Dopamine is also known as the feel-good hormone. It's a neurotransmitter that is highly responsible for many, many functions in the body. For example, like memory, mood, cognition, movement, deep pleasure reward system, attention regulation, falling asleep, and waking up, and of course learning, just to name a few most notable ones. Dopamine even has an effect on your blood vessels. But another thing, a lot of people with ADHD tend to develop heart problems later in life, but that's more of a just struggling to keep up with your health rather than not having dopamine is not really needed for your blood. It's more for relaxing the vessels. Off topic, but coming back. So knowing all this, going down this rabbit hole, a lot of symptoms start to make sense. For example, inattentiveness, so being easily distracting, being unable to finish tasks, happens because whatever your brain is supposed to be preoccupied with just it's not stimulating enough, and your brain just kind of throws out the window. Or, for example, hyperactivity, when you're lacking dopamine, because you lose a lot of it, movement is a great way to gain some of it back. So in a nutshell, ADHD is basically your brain struggling to keep all the dopamine in your brain because it just gets lost somewhere, and then all the symptoms start showing up. So after all of this information went into my brain and I processed it, I finally understood why all these articles rubbed the wrong way on me. That is because they all strive to be this mini DSM-5 with extra steps and a roadmap to an ADHD-free life, which is not possible because, again, it's genetic. But what people need, especially what I needed when I was going through this research, was an explanation of what's going on in my own mind, what's going on in my head, right? And to put it simply, you can't really fix a problem if you don't know what is at fault. So, sorry again. So I think the name change would be amazing because the right name should hint to what ADHD is and would encourage the right questions. And in truth, a lot of people already talk about a name change. For example, an online magazine, Attitude, spelled ADD-etude, which talks about ADHD everything, asked its readers whether they dislike the name ADHD. And more than half people agreed that, yeah, ADHD is not a good name, we need a better one. There are actually some pretty good ones that they suggested was variable attention disorder and dysregulated attention disorder, which they're okay, but they don't explain what it is. Again, we're focusing on the symptoms. We need to focus on what's at fault. Actually, there were some really funny ones that I liked, which zoomies, the thing that cats get, neurospicy, which is just what people use to describe anyone who's not neurotypical, or exceptional artistic ability of the genius variety. as an artist, I can agree kind of to that yeah, it kind of improves your ability to be creative, but I wouldn't say that's the thing that makes you creative. Everyone can be creative. But jokes aside, I believe that a lot of good could come from a name change. And it could act even as a further conversation starter about talking other mental disorders, because like when you hear schizophrenia or like let's say ACD, like you don't really know what those things are. You just kind of like hear things about it. So a name change, I think, would be great. Of course, it would come with some backlash. In the same magazine, only like 14% agree that the name was already appropriate, but again, they would probably argue that we don't need a name change because people don't like changes. And as I mentioned before, ADHD, of course, is not a bad name. It covers what ADHD looks like from the outside, sometimes pretty well. And is a widely recognized name. Like, I think everybody heard ADHD before. I talked about it once before, right? As for the name change, I would personally prefer it to be called DRD, or dopamine regulation dysfunction. I believe it raises the right questions. What is dopamine? How can it be dysregulated? And only then, how does that dysregulation affect the symptoms? Like, what symptoms does it show? So, like, if there was a vote amongst like the most accurate names for ADHD, I think this one be the one. And of course, as all changes, it would not happen instantly. After all, medical taxonomy is a long process. But what I hope you learn from my speech is to never judge a book by its cover, and what's in a name does matter. It holds a lot of value. So never judge a mental disorder by its name. Thank you.